8-0, a unanimous decision. The Constitutional Court has upheld the parliamentary motion to impeach President Yoon Suk Yeol, bringing his 5-year presidency to an abrupt end 2 years early. The court ruled that Yoon violated the constitution by declaring martial law and deploying troops to the National Assembly on December 3rd, among other charges. Yoon is the second South Korean president to be ousted from office after Park Geun-hye, who was impeached over corruption charges in 2017. Now, with Yoon's removal, a snap presidential election must take place within 60 days under South Korean law. To get some experts' thoughts and analysis on the court's ruling, the snap election and more, we're joined by 3 guests today for an extended in-depth. First, in the studio, we have law professor Song Se-ryun from Kyunghee University in Seoul. Professor Song, hello, it's great to have you with us.
Hello, happy to join you.
Next, we have via video call Professor Brian Myers, Professor of International Studies at Korea24 University in Busan. Professor Myers, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And we also have joining us via video call Park Geun-hye, who is a professor of criminal procedure at the Seoul University Law School. Professor Park, hello, and thank you for joining us as well.
Thank you for having me back.
Let me start with you, Professor Park, actually. For our listeners, could you walk us through the court's decision once again and their reasonings behind it?
Well, the unanimous ruling was totally unexpected given the delay of decision. As for the ruling, it is a 114-page long document, so I don't think I have enough time to go into all the details, but let me try. There was a series of entangled procedure to process questions, whether they would be serious enough to prevent the court from examining the case. The court said the case of President declaring martial law would be subject to judicial review, and the National Assembly didn't commit any wrongdoing when it made a decision to pass the motion, and to take out the insurrection charge from impeachment motion after passing it, since the factual matters would be the same. The court, with some clarifying separate opinions, talked about other procedure due process matters, such as rules against hearsay, admissibility of certain evidence, right to counsel, and impeachment trial. The point here is Yoon's arguments pointing out the violation of due process are not valid.
Right, so there was speculation that the court might not. So there was speculation that the court might not rule on the case at all due to these procedural issues that you mentioned. But you're saying ultimately those points were dismissed. What about the actual impeachment charges?
Well, so for substantive matters, there were 5 grounds for impeachment motion, and all justices agreed that the act committed by Yoon were grave and serious violation of constitutional law. Let me share with you certain critical issues here. First, Yoon's declaration of martial law was not legal since there was no warlike situation letting him declare the martial law. Yoon argued that the political pressure from opposition party was too much, giving him no choice but to declare the martial law. As you know, the opposition party engaged with lots of political stunts, impeaching high-ranking officials, slashing the country's budget for the first time. However, the court said it is politically understandable that Yoon might have felt the urge of doing something drastic, but declaring martial law cannot be justified. Second, Yoon argued that it was inevitable to send some troops to National Election Commission because there was a strong evidence that the formal general election was rigged, and the troops had to search and seize the evidence to prove that. The court ruled that some doubt could not justify the action of sending troops to a constitutionally independent institute. Third, the fact that Yoon sent troops to the National Assembly had the purpose of blocking the National Assembly vote to lift the martial law. So this action, even if it lasts for a short period of time, couldn't be justified. Fourth, Yoon didn't observe all the necessary procedures to make the declaration legal. Yoon didn't notify the National Assembly and did not hold a proper cabinet meeting. In all, although there are some separate opinions attached, the court decided that Yoon's series of actions following the declaration of martial law were grave and serious violation of the Constitution.
Right, so Professor Song, it was a pretty damning assessment in the end. What's your take on the court's ruling and its reasoning?
Well, as Professor Park laid out, there was not much disagreement going into the trial that there was violations of laws and the Constitution. I think, in my mind, that the question was whether those were grave enough. And what court in unison said was that, yes, it was a serious violation. It reminded me of the kind of feeling that I had with the former President Park Geun-hye's impeachment. Constitutional Court seemed to be putting a very high standard and very big responsibility of preserving and protecting the president. I mean, the Constitution to the president. Same message this time. I think that they thought that the Constitution needs to be carefully protected, and also any kind of infraction from the president is not something to scoff at. Saying that it's a short martial law that didn't fly at all. Nobody died, no blood was shed. Didn't matter. Constitution was violated, and it's grave enough.
Professor Myers, what did you make of the court's ruling? What was your reaction?
Well, I thought it made good sense. I think I stand between the two camps, political camps here in a way, because I do believe that Yoon's allegations of electoral fraud and anti-state elements merit looking into, and I understand also his frustration at the serial impeachment of top officials and so on. But I think the Constitutional Court was right in saying that the problems which Yoon and his legal team had referred to did not constitute an emergency serious enough to warrant martial law. And remember, President Yoon himself likened the situation to a pot of water boiling very slowly, and that doesn't sound like an emergency to me either. In retrospect, I think he and his team should have followed a different strategy. I think they should have admitted that the declaration was wrong. They should have expressed contrition. Yoon in particular should have. But at the same time, they should have argued that the error was not quite grave or not quite momentous enough to merit removing him from office. That might have done a little bit better. But in any case, I found nothing in the court's ruling that I would consider unreasonable.
This decision came 111 days after the National Assembly passed the motion to impeach him. It took the court far longer than the impeachment trials for Roh Moo-hyun and Park Geun-hye, which took 63 days and 91 days respectively. Professor Park, why do you think it took so long for the court to reach a decision?
Well, I think it will remain as a mystery. My only guess at this point is the court tried to be extra careful, so there won't be any controversy left. The court ruling only had separate opinions. It didn't have opposing opinions. It led me think that the court was considering the importance of unity. In case the court is split in this monumental case, it would have been too detrimental to the unity of the whole country. So all the justices worked so hard to reach the unanimous ruling.
Professor Song, brief reaction to why it took so long. What do you think it could have been?
I agree with Professor Park. I think they were extra cautious because the country was divided into two in a very, very contentious mood. So they wanted to be very exact in their logic and their rulings. I think just the fact that the 8-0 was a surprising outcome, I think that I wouldn't be surprised if they made a conscious effort to make it unanimous at the end. So I think it might have taken some time getting there. I think that the Korean political situation is very very tense at this point. I think they were mindful of that impact that would have with the decision.
Now, President Yoon later in the day issued a statement apologizing for failing to meet the public's expectations. In a message disclosed by his legal team, Yoon said he is deeply grateful to those who supported him. He went on to say that it was a great honor to work for the country and that he will always pray for it and its people. Professor Myers, what was your reaction to Yoon's remarks there?
Well, I thought they were way too short. You know, the brevity of the statement made it seem to have been written in a spirit of petulance or sulkiness. You know, a lot of Yoon supporters over the past few months, young and old, have been sitting out there on the streets in bad weather, snow and rain. And I think they deserved, and they probably expected more of an expression of gratitude than just those rather perfunctory lines. I also think more of an apology was deserved by the people who were traumatized on December the 3rd by having armed soldiers burst in on them. And I think most of all, Yoon needed to apologize explicitly to the military and to those officers who have been detained as a result of that fateful night. Because even if they don't end up doing prison time, I think their careers have been ruined. And I just don't think that brief statement really conveys proper contrition to those people.
Professor Park, what about you?
Well, I think his announcement was actually targeting his supporters. I hope that that actually has some calming effect to his loyal supporters. He seems to accept the reality of getting ousted. That is good for the unity of the whole country, and it is really unfortunate to impeach sitting president once again.
Professor Song, what did you make of it, especially as Professor Myers perhaps suggested that it was perhaps too brief, but what do you think?
Well, brief, but it was a good message because I was fearful of him maybe instigating his supporters or sending a message, defiant message, simply because he did that before. But I think it was a message in the right direction. I agree that he should have been more contrite, appearing himself, making an apology. I think, but it's an honor to serve you. That kind of message is kind of standard, but that's something that we need because we've seen a lot of common sense or the kind of political decorum destroyed in our politics. So at the end, all the parties accepting the decision and the president saying that he respects the decision, however short it is, I think is the right direction.
Right, so you do see it as a message of acceptance then?
Right.
Okay, Yoon is also fighting insurrection charges in a separate criminal trial, of course, which began in February. Professor Park, what do you think the Constitutional Court's impeachment ruling could mean for Yoon's criminal trial? Do you think it tells us anything?
Well, my personal take to that is while court might feel more comfortable in terms of making any decision, since Yoon is not a sitting president, the fact that the criminal trial has to apply more strict rules of evidence, the outcome is remain to be seen, and certainly it will take more than a year to have a trial court decision. Also, since he's not the president anymore, it opens a floodgate for many other criminal charges being investigated and prosecuted. There are many rumors and cases where Yoon and the former First Lady might have been involved in the general election in illegal ways, and Yoon's conduct while he was in office will be also under microscope. So it is expected that he would face many other criminal trials as well.
Okay, so perhaps more trials to come, but on the insurrection case, you're not sure about the outcome, but it will take time, you're saying. Professor Song, what about you? What do you see ahead for President Yoon in these criminal trials, and does the Constitutional Court's impeachment tell us anything about what the insurrection trial will look like going forward as well?
I think it'll have an impact. I mean, the evidentiary, the standard is different, but the fact that he was, the impeachment was upheld, it is a data point that will affect the criminal trial. But here is, I think the floodgate is right. He doesn't have the immunity. All kinds of the charges that would have been withheld when he was a president will be open. But the thing is, for me personally, I wouldn't care too much about what happens in there, because he's not the president. What he does and his future does not affect the country. So it's unfortunate that as a private citizen, he will go through all kinds of legal troubles. But I think my interest will wane because it doesn't really affect the country and me personally.
Still, there are some who are worried, who suspect that the prosecution could seek a new warrant to detain him as he was released from detention in March on technical grounds. Can we hear your insights, legal insights on that, whether you think he will be there will be a new warrant to detain him?
Yeah, I think there's a legal ground to seek that route. And I think it's prudent for the prosecutors to do so, because they want to, prosecute to the maximum and diligently prosecute these crimes. And crimes has been discovered, investigated, and I think there's enough ground to do that. It's just that they'll do so, and I'll have to see what kind of the public opinions would he affect, or whether the party will be affected by his criminal persecution. My gut instinct at this point is that the PP will distance themselves from the president very, very quickly, and it might not really affect the political future of the party or the Korea, or they will try to. But at this point, this is a big day for the country, but also for the individual future in terms of legal, stakes that the former President Yoon has.
Well, let's talk more about the political implications as well, because Yoon's impeachment means that a presidential election will take place within 60 days. Professor Myers, how do you think the presidential election will pan out? What issues do we need to look out for? And do you think perhaps Yoon will exercise his political influence on the party?
Well, Yoon was never very good at politics to begin with. That was one of the big problems of his presidency, and he's certainly not going to acquire that political touch now that he's out of office. But if you look at the size of those anti-impeachment protests and the increase in support from young voters, you've got to think there's potential here for the conservative candidate to do much better than Hong Jun-pyo did in 2017, when the People Power Party, or its earlier equivalent, was feeling very demoralized. But the key to winning elections is to have a unified party behind you, and it looks like Lee is going to get an uncontested nomination, and that's going to give him, I think, an advantage over his conservative rival. On the right wing, Kwon Song-dong is calling for unity now, but that's never been the strength of the conservative camp in South Korea. As for issues, I think foreign affairs is going to play a bigger role on the campaign trail this time than it did in, say, the last two presidential elections, because the relationship with the U.S. is going to have a direct effect on South Korean incomes, a direct, massive effect on the domestic economy. And that's perhaps where a conservative candidate might seem to many voters, rightly or wrongly, to be a better choice. But whether that's going to be enough for the conservatives to defeat Lee Jae-myung, I'm a little bit doubtful there.
Professor Park, what about you? What do you see ahead for the presidential race now?
Well, firstly, the issue is whether the court would try to interfere or intervene with the election is of importance. It will be interesting to see that whether the Supreme Court render any decision for Lee Jae-myung's public election law trial. The court might try to have some distance from politics, taking some time to render the final decision for Lee. But it is not certain how soon the ruling will be out, and I don't think it would not matter whether the court had a final ruling on Lee's case before the election date, as long as the court decide not to make its own ruling and to send the case back to Seoul Higher Court. For Yoon's involvement in politics, my answer is why not, considering his active engagement with his supporters. It is quite likely that he will put his hands on the final selection of a presidential candidate for the party. Personally, I think it will be disaster for the party because as his influence over the politics gets stronger, despite of the fact that he was impeached, the popularity of Yoon's choice will just wind down.
Okay, so you went to see whether the Supreme Court might make a ruling on the election law violation case involving the Democratic Party presidential hopeful and leading contender Lee Jae-myung before the presidential election comes. Professor Park, what about you? What do you view ahead for the presidential election? What do we need to look out for?
Presidential election, that's a messy situation at this point. I mean, we're again in a situation where we have 2 months to select a president, and the president will be coming in without the transition period. And you know what happened the last time it happened. I think for PP, they are in a bigger hole. Obviously, they don't have a certified candidate at this point. And they were in the messy situation before Yoon Suk Yeol came in and kind of rescued to become a ruling party. But at this point, they decided with the losing president, and they didn't really prepare themselves or reform themselves to prepare any kind of message that says, you know, conservatism in Korea has a vision and it is thus. We just don't have that message. We just have a vague memory of them siding with the very radical faction of the party. And I know there are some moderates in there, but we haven't seen much of it recently. So this election is for the opposition party and Mr. Lee to lose. He is a sure candidate at this point, very strong. But only thing that is going for the ruling party is that if Mr. Lee Jae-myung becomes a president, presidency is on the opposition party right now, and the legislature is near supermajority with the Minju party. That's not a good ingredient for a good democracy. So I think the PP would work very hard to send the message, you know, you got to have some kind of checks and balances. But 60 days, too short.
Well, let me get one or two final thoughts before we wrap up today. Professor Myers, looking back at all this now, what do you think it tells us about South Korean democracy, the nation? Is this a turning point, or is this a point where perhaps there could be further division in politics in Korea?
Well, I think it put South Korea in a better light than what happened 8 years ago. I think the impeachment motion that was passed in the National Assembly and the ruling, the way in which that ruling in the Constitutional Court was reached at that time, I think did not reflect as well on South Korea as what we've just seen. I was particularly impressed at how well the Constitutional Court was able to preserve confidentiality throughout, you know. Just looking at Lee Jae-myung's face over the past few days, he was not looking very happy. And that led to all these conservative assessments that the ruling was going to be 4-4. And in the end, it just turned out that the Constitutional Court was really keeping a very tight lid on what it was doing. I thought that reflected well in the country as well. And let's keep this in perspective. I mean, as bad as the declaration of martial law was, it's not as if South Korea is banning opposition party leaders and banning free speech and doing the kind of disturbing things that we're seeing underway in some countries in Western Europe. So generally speaking, I think it all bodes pretty well for the future of South Korean politics.
Well, we're out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there. But we appreciate everyone's insights today. We'll be speaking to Professor Song Se-ryun from Kyunghee University in Seoul, Professor Brian Myers from Dongsa University, and Professor Park Geun-hye from the Seoul University Law School. Thank you all for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.